Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world, everyone, and welcome to today's TechStrong Learning Experience brought to you by Syxsense. My name is Matt Delman, the Director of Products here at TechStrong, and I'll be your host of today's discussion. Before we get to this exciting and informative panel today, I do have a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to share with a friend, the on-demand recording is going to be made available shortly after the workshop concludes with a link to access as well. If you have any questions, we'd like you to please submit them using the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab, where we want you to engage with our speakers as well as your fellow audience members. Share your thoughts or just tell us where you're tuning in from. And then also at the conclusion of our web class, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around for the duration of the program. With that, I am excited to kick off our session today with the topic being simplify, secure, strengthen, implementing zero trust across your endpoints. With me today are Rob Brown, Chief Customer Success Officer at Syxsense, and Graham Brooks, Pre-Sales Manager at Syxsense. And it is now my distinct pleasure to turn the floor over to Rob to get us started. Thank you so much for being with us.
Super duper. Thanks so much for that great introduction. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for another masterclass series for Zero Trust. And we really appreciate you taking the time over the next 45, 50 minutes to learn about Zero Trust and how we may be able to assist you from an education and a product perspective for implementing Zero Trust in your environment. And as I was speaking earlier, I'm joined today by Graham Brooks, who is going to help you with a practical demo of Zero Trust. Graham, do you want to give everyone a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. So, Graham Brooks, pre-sales manager. I spend a lot of time with our existing customers and then also with potential new customers, teaching them how to use our platform, showing them how to implement it effectively. And today, I'm going to be showing you guys how you can implement Zero Trust for your endpoints in a really simple, streamlined process using our platform.
Fantastic. Thanks, Graham. And once again, I'm Rob Brown, Head of Customer Success, and own the Managed Services division at Syxsense, where we deploy patches and remediate vulnerabilities for our clients worldwide. And we've deployed over 100 million patches over the last decade, securing our customer environments. And some of the lessons from that experience we'll actually be talking about today in this webinar series. So this is actually an interesting start for Zero Trust, because Zero Trust actually protecting your devices usually is because of something that you've seen in the news. And now this is typical of the news outlets that you might see first thing in the morning when you're drinking your tea. And I'm going to help dissect this particular message to help you to help you understand where this fits into a Zero Trust vision. So you might see these kind of news broadcasts. The threat actor attempted to use CVE 2021 44228, a vulnerability with a CVSS score of 10 to access Big Corp's servers. And this typically is what you see during the news bulletins, and it gets passed around in emails and is released by CISA. Because somebody has been accessed, someone has been exploited, ransomware has been spread, and immediately what our clients are doing is they're taking the CVE and they're looking in their environment, or our prospects are looking in their environment to see if CVE is in fact detected. What you don't often see is the final piece to this to this sentence. Fortunately, device trust blocked the access request. So zero trust is sort of looking at what risks you know, the risks that you don't know, and the risks that you have no idea exist at all, and sort of putting some pieces together in a layered approach that allow you to formulate the level of risk you're prepared to take. So what we're going to do is going to dissect this sentence together and actually show you how this fits in with the zero trust journey, starting with threat actors. Now, we know that there are incredible threat actors around the world, sponsored by governments, by countries, cyber terrorists that simply want to cause harm to your environments, to take down websites. We also have cyber criminals that are wanting to look for monetary gain. They're typically the ones that would spread the ransomware, and you have to pay some money in order to get your environment back to normal. But we also have other types of uh, threat actors, such as hacktivists and insiders, and those are actually what you might classify as the white hat people. They are looking after your interests by bringing to the industry known vulnerabilities that could be exploited to spread a ransomware or another type of attack. So it's important that you understand that all of the vulnerabilities that could exist don't always come through the cyber terrorists and the criminals, but some of them are actually really great suggestions on how to protect your environment the most to ensure that your devices are secured and that lateral attacks are minimized. And then we've got the vulnerability itself. So the vulnerability itself there's a vast database of vulnerabilities inside NVD. I like to call these risk types because vulnerabilities, or patches, as some may call it, is only one small piece of a very large pool of vulnerabilities that you may choose to add to your zero trust policy. So zero trust is more like a layered approach where you add these extra layers to the policy as you find these vulnerabilities in your environment. It's very much a moving target. From 1 week to the next, you'll find that there are a huge number of vulnerabilities added to the NVD database. Each and every day there is a massive amount, and there actually might be a poll coming up later where we are kind of interested to see how many you think they've just been made. But these risk types range from configuration vulnerabilities on your machines, such as the TLS 1.0, which is really not very recommended at all, to firewalls, to BitLocker. The types of configuration that you have on your device could potentially expose it as an entry point. And so your level of risk is the risk you're prepared to take if you don't remediate it, or should you remediate it urgently. We also have credentials. Local accounts called administrator are one of the easiest brute force type of attacks, because if there is an account called administrator, they already have 50% of the answer. All they have to do is guess the password. So zero trust can include credentials or password policies. Maybe you've got complex policies on certain local accounts, but not on all. And your level of risk obviously is based on that. Patches. Most of the people that join our webinars have some form of patching, whether that is Microsoft only or maybe Microsoft plus third party. But patches have a known solution, such as Print Nightmare Inspector. We're going to talk about Print Nightmare. Actually, it's quite unique in a little bit. But where you've got patches based on severity of patches, you may actually need to add those patches also into your zero trust policy. And then 0 day. 0 day is in two parts. You've got a 0 day vulnerability where there is no patch or solution, and you have 0 day vulnerability where there's no solution at all. hence the name 0 day. An example would be log4j, which is actually a fascinating vulnerability. We're actually going to dissect that actually today to show you some of the vulnerabilities that existed that was used to actually exploit it. So you're building your trust policies based on not just one single factor, but actually on multiple factors. And this is how you actually build your layers inside your zero trust vision. CVE is the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Database. And now CVE is a registered database of all vulnerabilities. You might call these tier 1, where if a vulnerability is registered with this database, it has detailed information about the vulnerability itself, the risk that it poses. It may or may not actually have a solution, and it may or may have more than one. It may have one or more than one impacted products. When you put these together, it gets registered into the CVE database. And those actually aren't just patches, they are Windows vulnerabilities, they are passwords that don't have complexity. It is an incredible database to keep an eye on. We're very lucky at Syxsense to have access to the CVE database, which actually helps us populate the vulnerabilities that are registered within here into Syxsense so that you can utilize it for both patch management and vulnerability management as well as zero trust. Now, every vulnerability that is created should have a severity. Because it doesn't really help you make decisions if you don't have a severity. And sometimes the vendor issues a severity, and sometimes you get an independent CVSS score. CVSS is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. We've been using it for close to 8 or 9 years now, since our product was first brought to market. It is based on a highly sophisticated calculator, and every vulnerability that you find, you can use this calculator to work out the actual severity, and that can help you to either add the vulnerability to your zero trust policy, or whether you just want to remediate the vulnerability as part of a standard patching process. Now, CVSS is broken into 3 different parts. The first is called the basic metric group, which is looking at the exploitability metrics, such as how the attack can occur, over what network the attack can occur, the attack complexity, is it hard, is it easy, privileges, what type of user permissions does the user need if they are in fact going to be starting the vulnerability from their device because they clicked a link. User interaction, does it require them actually to click a link? And scope, which we will talk about soon, is a very interesting type of risk for a vulnerability. When a scope is changed, it means the vulnerability can hop out of a particular exposed piece of code. So let's say you have a vulnerability with Google Chrome, and if the scope is changed, it means it can jump out of Google Chrome into another technology on the operating system. It's incredibly serious. In fact, that's how SolarWinds was able to hop from one particular part of the operating system and into another. Now, CVSS is a wonderful, wonderful calculator. It is available online. You can actually build your own CVSS scores based on that calculator. You've got the temporal group and the environmental metric group as well. That helps you to balance the score against whether there is code that is exploiting that particular vulnerability or whether it's reported confidently in the industry. The CVSS score is out of 10. So as we go through some of the examples, those that are closer to 10 are the far more serious vulnerabilities that we're addressing. Now, with that, I'm going to hand you over to Graham to take us through the zero trust security model for both zero trust as a concept plus also device trust. So, Graham, do you want to take us through the next couple of slides?
Of course. So, what Rob has done so far is provide you the backdrop around patching around configuration management, and the varied components that make up risk in your environment. Often they will be referred to as the attack surface of your organization. In the industry, we have begun developing this new model for understanding how to respond to changes in your attack surface. That model is called the Zero Trust Security Model. Some people might be familiar with ZTNA. ZTNA is Zero Trust on the network, or Zero Trust Network Access. But that's just one realm. There's actually a bunch of different ways that Zero Trust can be understood. But at its most basic conceptual level, all that Zero Trust is saying is if any of those things, those patches, those configurations, those user accounts that are inappropriately configured, any one of those contexts is not safe, then we don't provide access. By default, we assume that a device is not approved, and only after we can attest to the fact that your patching is healthy, you've got your antivirus products installed, your user accounts are safe, the physical location of the device makes sense, your network access control is valid. All of those components are built into this concept of Zero Trust as a security model. There's a bunch of different components. And one of those components, which is what Syxsense manage, is that Zero Trust device trust. This is a subset within Zero Trust, and it's our responsibility to ensure that your endpoints are safe against the specific elements that we talked about earlier, those configurations and those patches and those policies. Rob, if you wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. Right here, we actually have a pretty easy example. You've got servers, you've got desktops, and you've got laptops. That's the domain of Syxsense. That's the sort of endpoint that we're responsible for managing when it comes to Zero Trust. And by default, it's not trusted. We assume that until that device has gone through our checklist, which later when I show you the console, I'll go to some of those specific checklist items. You can see how that would actually play out. We're going to go through that list and we're going to say, do you have any patches, anything critical, any Patch Tuesday content that's outstanding? Oh, you do? I can't give you access to Outlook because we don't know if you might have Felina, for example, present on your device. Someone could execute against Outlook based off of Felina. That's scary. That's bad. We're going to restrict your access. Or a completely different circumstance, perhaps you don't have your antivirus product. Okay, we'll let you access some corporate resources, but you can't execute anything. I don't want you installing any software if AV isn't running on your device. And so that's kind of that Zero Trust posture. It's not a one and done thing. We're going to choose and be selective about what levels of access we give you based off of the information we're provided. And we do all of that in real time. So that's Zero Trust as an overarching theme. It's validation, and after validation, providing access. And if validation can't be done, deny access. And then on a more specific level, you have that device trust, providing access to an endpoint given a set checklist. Rob, I will hand it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Graham.
Yeah.
That's really good. Thank you. I really enjoy hosting these masterclasses. I actually learn so much from you, pal. What I want to do is just cover off again a couple of examples of that layered approach to Zero Trust, because if you're new to the Zero Trust concept, it can actually seem like you need to ensure everything is done all at once. And so just this is a concept that my mentor actually taught me when he was running me through the concept of Zero Trust. And so if you imagine like a balance where you've got some risk that you're prepared to take, and you might, as Graham mentioned, have certain things that when you add them to the scale, don't actually make that much of a movement. It doesn't tip too much. But when you start adding on additional layers of risk that have been detected, suddenly there gets to a point where, that risk is simply not good enough, and that's where you can start restricting access to your environments. In the biggest case, actually isolating a device completely from the network whilst the help desk investigate and resolve the vulnerabilities on those machines. So take Zero Trust as a layered approach using multiple elements of what you accept as the risk you're prepared to take. And so I've done a couple of examples. I've picked some from last year and more recent that actually just gives you an idea of how you might handle the decisions you make around your Zero Trust policy. Starting with Print Nightmare. Print Nightmare was a nightmare for several reasons. It was first released. Microsoft first released in June 2021 a patch to resolve a low threat security issue. Didn't hit anyone's radar at this point. 2 to 3 weeks later, they reevaluated the risk. They realized, based on the CVSS score, hey, you know what? This has been elevated to critical. It now has a remote code execution flaw that simply cannot be ignored. And Microsoft scrambled at that point to go and produce a hotfix for the patch. That's why this is a patch of a patch of a patch. There was actually 3 patches they released in the end because they kept making a couple of boo-boos when it comes to the fix causing issues with devices. That patch actually broke printing, caused not only blue screen but black screen, not just for specific hardware of printers, but actually all hardware printers that used a print spooler. And what Microsoft actually did next is the next day, believe it or not, they released a second hotfix trying to fix the issue. At the same time, they released a new CVE, which was to address the source of this risk, which was the print spooler. What we did at Syxsense is we added a vulnerability detector that would detect the status of the print spooler. And if the patch was not applied, it would then go ahead and disable the print spooler, effectively resolving the vulnerability until a reliable patch could be released. Later on in August, they released another hotfix for the same patch. And guess what? That broke everything all over again. That's why since then, any kind of print updates that come out from Patch Tuesday, we always recommend additional testing, especially printing to your virtual devices as well as your physical devices. So if you ever print to PDF, it may actually still use the print spooler, and therefore that testing must be conducted. Now, when we dissect Print Nightmare, it actually has a very interesting background, and there's actually a poll that we're going to put up for everybody just whilst we're dissecting this particular CVE. Now, this CVE has an attack vector of network. That means that an exploit could occur over any network, including the internet. So if your devices were accessing or able to access the internet, it could actually be used as an attack vector. It has low attack complexity. It's very simple to do with no privileges or low privileges by the end user running on the device, with no user interaction at all. Now, if you do have your users aware of a security policy that they're not supposed to click links, it would be interesting if you can answer from 1 to 10 whether or not you're training your users, whether or not they should be clearing out their emails that could look suspicious. It was an attack vector for this one, and we found that a lot of customers weren't aware of the risk, that it actually didn't require any user interaction whatsoever. This one has a CVSS of 8.8. The second one we're going to talk about is Log4j. This is the really interesting. I actually saw the YouTube video when it was 900 or so, 900 or so views at the time. We had just seen it, and it had been released to our database that very same day. Obviously, Log4j is a Java log file vulnerability, and incredibly serious. It was first assessed with a CVSS score of 10, and that actually made it what we call a 0-day. Now, statistically, 46% of devices are using, had a attack, a Log4j related attack. 21% of organizations were disrupted by this. So software that was being used that contained it had to be turned off, or the binaries had to be deleted. In fact, 30% in the last poll, 30% of organizations still have unresolved Log4j vulnerabilities. And 95% of Java applications rely on it. It's incredibly serious. We actually watched the Minecraft video where they actually launched the Log4j attack. It was really cool to see that that was just somebody that found the vulnerability. They weren't looking to exploit it. They weren't looking for ransomware. Unfortunately, though, it did actually end up being quite one of the most serious vulnerabilities of the year. Now, if we dissect this particular vulnerability, we have very similar to the previous. Its attack vector was a network-based attack with low attack complexity, no privileges whatsoever for the user, no user interaction at all, but it had a scope change. So they could effectively come out of the Log4j code into the operating system and potentially exploiting another part of the operating system. Now, these two particular vulnerabilities are just elements. Obviously, they could be patched, but they also could be classified as configuration issues. So Log4j, if it was found, could simply be deleted, as well as Print Nightmare. So just because there are patches doesn't mean that couldn't be part of your zero trust vision. In fact, at Syxsense, we do have a 10-second check on every single system for the Log4j binary. And if the Log4j binary is actually found, it quarantines the machine immediately whilst it actually deletes it. It's a risk we're simply not prepared to take. So now we've given you some examples of zero trust. Graham, did you want to give us a demo and walk us through those practical ways in which we can help our viewers to secure their environment further?
Absolutely. I'm actually really excited for this one. We've put a lot of time into our zero trust platform. I think that will be very apparent as we go through the material here. So what we're looking at right now is the home screen of our product. This is Syxsense Enterprise. Before I get into the specifics, I'm going to give you the 30-second architectural overview. So we're a cloud-hosted platform. We have an agent that you'll install on each of the assets that you want to manage. That agent then communicates in essentially real time up to the console with telemetry. So it's telling the console what patches might be missing, what configurations might be out of spec, if there's software installed or not installed that's relevant. All of that information just gets passed up to the console as needed on a basis of your choosing. So that's architecture. Using that architecture, we've built a model for device trust. And I've got a few different examples I'm going to show you today. Before I do that, though, if you look here on this map, you'll see that I have a red pin here in Utah. That red pin represents a data center that has devices. Some of those devices are trusted, and some of those devices aren't. In fact, you can see here under trust status, I have slightly more untrusted devices than I do trusted. If I drill in further and click into that Utah location, I can see which devices are showing up as trusted and which devices, those being false, are showing up as untrusted. From that, I can then make decisions about what I need to do to make my devices safe again. In order to make those decisions, I need to have a process in place that evaluates my devices and then enforces compliance on them. And that happens in two places. One, in our Zero Trust policy tool, and the other is going to be in our automation engine, Cortex. So here, if I go to Zero Trust and then select my trust evaluations, I see that I've got two trust evaluations. I have one for servers and I have one for workstations. For right now, we're going to focus on the workstation trust. Opening up my workstation trust, it's going to provide me with an overview of the different policy enforcements that I have configured for my laptops and desktops. The most important one here at the top is that antivirus posture check. This is something where we're going to run on a rotating basis. I think I've told it to run every 10 seconds. What this is doing is just asking a very simple question. It's a WMI query against the device. It's not taking up significant system resources. All it's doing is asking, do I have antivirus installed on my device? If I do, fantastic. The device is trusted against that posture check. Remember, when we were talking about Zero Trust at the beginning of this conversation, I said it was a checklist. It's not just a default for everything. You have specific elements of compliance that you need to enforce. One of those is antivirus. Another one is my firewall posture check. A third one is going to be patching. And then I also have configuration management here. My patching posture check is looking not for all patches, because frankly, we don't care about everything. If, I don't know, 7-zip has an update that improves compression times, that's not relevant. If Google Chrome has a 0-day, that is incredibly relevant, and we need to manage our devices based off of that. And so you can create these posture evaluations that enforce on a spectrum. So here I have a patch enforcement where it's just scanning to see if there are any critical patches that are missing. And if there are, we then mark the device as not trusted. And then finally, I also have a configuration posture check. And right now, this is what's really killing me, because I've got all my antivirus posture checks, great. Firewall, great. Patching, awesome. My devices are really suffering because of their configuration compliance. I've got a lot of endpoints that have high and critical priority configurations that aren't enforced. Because of that, I'm limiting down the resources that some of my devices have access to, and I've marked those devices as untrusted in the console. I can actually see that in my reporting. So here, if I go over to my security vulnerability risk assessment, this is a report. Let me zoom in a little bit. It just shows how many devices are critically non-compliant, how many are high priority non-compliant, medium, low. And for right now, I just care about critical and high priority. I've only got one device that is critically non-compliant, but I have a lot of devices that have a variety of different kinds of high priority issues. And you can see that here. Have your standard median detection list, and then above that is the average detections per day. And right now I'm trending really high on that. And frankly, that's Rob's fault. Rob, his team, they write detection scripts that find all sorts of vulnerabilities, and they're constantly adding new ones into my list that I then have a process in place that remediates them. Unfortunately, for some of my environments, I haven't built that yet. And so my environment is showing a high burden of non-compliance. So that's kind of the story arc. But how do I enforce some of these policies? How do I actually improve the situation and not just live in a world of not trusted? Well, if I go back to the Syxsense console and go to Cortex, I have an example for you. Under intelligent endpoint postures, I've got a bunch of different kinds of requirements that I'm looking for. One of them is antivirus. Check to see if AV is installed. If it's not, install it, and then revalidate. Make sure that AV is installed. Very simple. This runs every 10 seconds on my devices in the same way that I have that check that enables and disables trust that runs every 10 seconds. And I have enforced this as a policy on a number of my devices. And if I go over here to this run 4, you'll see that I've got 23 devices that checked in and said, hey, we don't actually have antivirus installed. That's kind of scary. And so looks like all but one of them have completed that work. I have one straggler that's still working on it. And then I've got a bunch of devices that have deployed my AV product and enforced that policy on my device. Now, the end game is that you would have full trust across all spectrums. Right now, if I go to home, again, you'll see that some of my environments are trusted, some of them aren't, and it really just depends on the context. If we care about antivirus, all my devices are healthy. If we care about firewall enforcement and patch enforcement, all my devices are generally healthy again, with just a few counterexamples. But if we look at configuration management, look at all that high priority content. There's a significant burden of non-compliance as far as my configuration management is concerned. And if I wanted to, I could drill into that and start taking all of those items, bundling them into a workflow and pushing out a remediation set that would resolve each of those config issues so that my zero trust status could slowly but steadily move from a state of untrust to fully compliant. So that is our platform, and that's how we can use our platform to enforce zero trust, not just as a blanket statement, but on a case-by-case basis.
That's fantastic, Graham. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Just want to expand on a couple of things that you covered there, because what you actually mentioned was that based on level of trust, you can actually have an outcome assigned to that level of trust. So just because the device has an AV that isn't found, you are then able to assign a solution for that issue, and actually then to re-verify if the issue has been resolved. And I actually liked what you mentioned earlier when you said if your device is at a level of distrust, then you should stop certain applications from being used. Could that be used? Could that be also used for things like PowerShell? You know, if you don't have a trusted machine, could you block PowerShell from running in that? You used Outlook, but could you do it for PowerShell too?
Yeah, it'd actually be pretty simple. In our automation engine, we have the ability to do registry enforcement. I don't have the registry in front of me at the moment, but
sorry to give you something like out of the blue.
No, you're good. It's all good. So if I were to have a device that I had listed as untrusted, I could tell it to look at the registry and say, do you have a value here for PowerShell execution? And if it says yes, allow PowerShell. I'm just making something up here. If it says PowerShell allow and registry value is 1, I could create an enforcement that automatically sets that to 0 if the device is in an untrusted state against the antivirus posture check. So yes, absolutely doable.
That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, because I'm kind of curious about some of the polls we've actually had. We learned that customers of ours sometimes adopt, internet facing devices with an AV, and devices that don't have internet access. They don't have an AV, and those are really prime candidates for zero trust, because anything is able to be sort of launched on those machines. So I really do appreciate that fantastic demo. If anyone is still considering options for a zero trust, you have another question there, which is, where are you on your zero trust journey? But if you do actually have plans or questions or concerns, or you want to cover off some more of the educational pieces, we'd be delighted to discuss those with you. Even if you're not a Syxsense customer, we just want to make sure that if we can help from an education perspective, we can. Graham, your demo, is that finished now, or should we move back across to any questions? I can see quite a few questions, and a hide for everybody. Everyone's put a nice message in the chat there, so it's really nice to see that.
Yeah.
Should we jump across for the next 10 minutes or so and answer some questions?
Let's do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. So now as we move into questions, the first one we have is how to handle endpoint visibility. They mentioned gaining visibility into all the endpoints and their activities is crucial for implementing zero trust, but it can be challenging to have comprehensive visibility across all endpoints, especially when devices are off network or remote.
Yeah. I love that question. Rob, do you mind if I take that one?
Yeah, I was going to mention dashboards, but hey.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so there's two layers here. Layer one is how do you have visibility across networks and see physically where devices are and what they're doing. And the other part of that is what level of visibility do we actually have into the systems? What kind of information can we track? So the first component, we provide dashboards. We also have some really great reporting too in PDF, Excel, or even just API access. But at a really basic, simple level, if I wanted to, I could tell my console to look at different sets of data. So right now, I'm showing the full console, all of my assets across all geographies. But what if I needed to narrow that scope a little bit? What if I wanted to understand a particular environment and see how that environment's doing? For that, I can just go over here and click on a different device context. When I do that, it pulls up data specific to that organization. And so now I can see, wow, for that organization that has most of its devices in Utah and a couple devices in Los Angeles, we're seeing a pretty poor picture. It's not very healthy. Most of my devices have high priority patches pending. We've got some critical non-compliance, and none of my devices are trusted. So that's scary. If I flip the switch and say, hey, look at this other environment.
Sorry, Graham, would you mind?
Yes,
I think
please.
we might have lost your screen. Would you mind just resharing that screen?
Yes.
Just I know you're. That's really quite interesting. What you're.
Yeah. Can you see this now?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yep. Loading. That's
cool.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
All right. So if we look at one of our locations, we can actually drill in and see what's specifically relevant to that location and see what problems might be arising. And you can see here for one of my locations, I have great patch health. I've got great compliance against configuration management, but that environment does have some limited trust status. Flipping over to my other customer location, you can see a completely different picture. It's now severely non-compliant against patching, against configuration, and none of my devices are trusted. And then again, if I go out to that full spectrum where I can see all assets, most of my devices are healthy against patching, unhealthy against configuration. About a little less than half of my devices are trusted. You can create whatever context you want. You could say, hey, I need to know about all of my work from home devices. Set up a view that will show you just work from home. And then you can get that exact frame of reference. And because we are a cloud-hosted platform, we don't care what network your devices are on. As long as they have internet access and they can talk to Syxsense, we can provide you with useful telemetry.
That's right.
So that's the first part of the question. The second part, what kind of information can you retrieve? We'll cover anything you can think of. If you want to know configuration health, if you want to know what services are running, if you want to know when the user logged onto their device or when they logged out of their device, we can track all of that and provide that as telemetry for you to track.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next question, whoever wants to take it, up for grabs. Is there coverage specifically for identities monitoring in the Syxsense platform?
Would that be from the user specific basis? Because I think identities is typically things like your user accounts that you use to log onto the devices. Would that be correct, Graham?
If we're looking at it from that perspective, then yes, we can track which AD users are logging into a device and
To devices,
what
yeah.
domains are relevant to your Syxsense environment. So in that capacity, yes, we can track it. We don't do anything integrated into the, I don't know, Google Workspace, for example. That's an identity management tool. Or I know AWS has their own directory service. We don't integrate on that side, so we're not tracking that side of the conversation. We're tracking what we see happening on the device.
That's a great question.
Fantastic. So it seems like there's a strong geographic component in Syxsense. What's going to stop someone from, say, downloading a free VPN and using an IP from another country to bypass geographic restrictions?
Do you know, I was going to ask Graham that very same question. I was going to ask Graham that exact question. When you mentioned, Graham, about internet access just requiring access to the cloud, I was going to mention that, during COVID was probably the largest period of time that I can remember when VPNs were on the rise. And I was wondering to myself, what would stop you hiding your IP address if you were to go to another country? But to answer that question, what I would do from a zero trust perspective is I wouldn't allow a non-corporate VPN solution to be installed in the first place. So I wouldn't be worrying about hiding where they are actually from. I would look at the device and I'd say, if the VPN solution is not a supported company-owned software tool, then that should become automatically untrusted. And that should then trigger the uninstall of that application, ensuring that only the VPN that is a corporate tool is installed on the device.
Okay.
Exactly. What I'm building out right now is an example where someone installed an explicitly unapproved VPN product.
Oh, I love it.
If we found that software running, so we're not just looking if it's installed, but we're looking at some of those processes. Do we have any of those processes running on the endpoint? We then mark the device as untrusted. We're going to kill those processes. We're going to stop them from doing that. But then we're going to enforce a not trusted state, because that is a data point that's important to understand. And then once we've done that, we're going to submit an email. This can go out to your ticketing service or to, I don't know, SOC email. But I'm just going to put in tickets@syxsense.io. I'm going to put in the name of this device name. This is just a wild card. And then we're going to say something like open ticket unapproved software found. And just like that, you now have a process that'll open a ticket whenever we see someone trying to run one of those unapproved softwares. You can create a very extensive list if you want of all the things that you explicitly don't want to see. It's what we would call a global blacklist. If we find any of those global blacklist items, boom, turn it off, send a not trusted status out to that device. Maybe that could block their access to certain resources, and then send out that email opening a ticket in your SOC for someone from the security team to go give a phone call to that user.
Okay. Cool. Fantastic. Next audience question. This could be an interesting one. How do you ensure that you discover all APIs? And so, two-part question: what does zero trust actually look like for APIs?
Thinking about that one. I'm not sure I'm following the question in terms of like looking for APIs. Are we wanting to see what sort of traffic is coming from the endpoint? Is that the question?
I think so. It seems like it's more of an attack surface question.
Yeah. I actually think what APIs are typically called by from websites. So you would go to a website and you would run your API, and it would typically use a website in order to make that call. With the zero trust, Graham, would you be able to block access to certain websites? Could you actually give a whitelist and a blacklist of websites the users was allowed to access? And if the device wasn't trusted, then APIs wouldn't be possible. Would that be possible?
I think that's at least part of the solution. So yes, we definitely could do that. We could enforce access to specific resources on the network and deny resources. But if we look back to the beginning of this webcast where we were talking about zero trust and the different implementations, I showed you there's that framework where you have ZTNA, you've got device trust, you've got data trust, and there's a lot of different kinds of trust frameworks. What it sounds like you're describing is a little bit more of that ZTNA, zero trust on the network, which isn't entirely covered by Syxsense. That's not really our focus, because there's a lot of different elements to zero trust, and we focus exclusively on the endpoint. And it sounds like what you're looking for is a little bit more into that data access management and network topography management. Would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, right, exactly. So I know we have a lot of integration with our APIs, and I absolutely understand that it is a cause of great anxiety, blocking access to such external integrators, integration tools, because I understand APIs are used for collecting data and actually putting data in places like a database.
For sure.
Let's see. This one might be another interesting one to unpack as well. To what extent can an agent block access to a device?
That one's fun.
Yeah, that one is really fun. I'll let you take this one, Graham, because I mentioned that may be something quite interesting around our log4j detection. So in our tool, we can isolate the device from the network completely, so that device to device connectivity is not possible. That is absolutely blocked, including internet. However, when a device is in its isolated mode, it still has full Syxsense communication. We can send scripts, software distribution tasks, patching, vulnerability remediation to put the device back into a secure status. And then when it is in a secure status, we are then able to reverse that isolation, put it back on the network like it was before.
Exactly. Now, what if the device is irreparable? Maybe you have log4j and it's not just Apache, you've got all sorts of binaries and you can't find all of them, but you know they're there. And you just need that device locked down. What we could do is have that statement of trust that says, hey, we found it, we fixed some of the stuff, but there's still a lot of outline that we can't really resolve. We want to just lock down access. That end user shouldn't be allowed to use that computer because it's a high enough risk profile. So what I'm building here is essentially a crypto locking or crypto wiping functionality where we would ensure that BitLocker is enabled on the device. After we enable BitLocker, we then enforce it using a passphrase. That passphrase is something that you, the IT admin, knows. It's something that the end user does not. And then finally, when we're done, we're going to reboot that device. So they're going to have their device shut down briefly and it turns back on, and it will prompt them with a BitLocker PIN. What they do not know the solution to, they won't be able to access their device. You've essentially crypto wiped that endpoint. I think the NSO group out of Israel might be able to crack it, but if you're not a nation state, you're not going to have an issue.
Yeah, I was just thinking that would be a great idea as well if you had a stolen laptop. So not only is it accessing things it's not supposed to. If it was stolen, you could just effectively encrypt it, and it access to your corporate data would then be completely secured. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have one final question. From the audience. You mentioned enabling BitLocker. What are you doing on Linux or on a Mac?
Love that question. So we actually have a very strong presence in Linux and in Mac OS. It's a little bit more code driven than our Windows solution. So Windows, we've got a massive library of actions that are all pre-built that you can just drag over and inform the OS of what you want to do just using the GUI. For macOS, I'll use that example. They have File Vault is their equivalent to BitLocker. I can enforce File Vault on a Mac using our bash action. So here, if I just type in, I think it's actually sh. So I'm going to do script. There we go. Execute sh script. Drag that over. I don't have the exact command in front of me, but it'd be something like file vault enable, something like that. And I could push that out to my device. I could build it out further if I want to. I could tell it to look for the File Vault service, make sure it's enabled. If it's not, then run this execution, and it will then push File Vault out to that device. On the Windows side, we do record keys. We do have Azure Key Store enabled, so we don't host those incredibly sensitive details of the device, but it's safely housed in Azure, and we can make API calls to Azure to retrieve those keys when you need them. For Linux and Mac OS, we don't currently support that, though I am pressuring our development team to get that enabled.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, with that, that is all the time we have for questions today. So this has been outstanding. I'd like to thank Rob and Graham for taking the time to join our discussion and share their expertise with us. A quick reminder that today's session was recorded. Following this panel, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording on the Security Boulevard website. Just visit securityboulevard.com/webinars. Look in the on-demand section, and it will be waiting for you. Now, on to the 4 winners of our $25 gift card drawing. The first one, Joe S. The second one is Hiram W. Number 3 is Vern W. And number 4 is Christine B. Congratulations to the 4 of you. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. If you do not receive an email, please check your spam folder. Once again, Rob, Graham, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We have a couple of minutes. If you have any final remarks or anything.
Not for me. Just want to say thank you very much for joining us. We do run these masterclasses quite regularly, and we do really love to educate the industry as well as providing value for Syxsense customers.
All right.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And then I will close by thanking Syxsense for sponsoring today's webinar, and thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of the presentation. Please, quick reminder, take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at an upcoming TechStrong Learning webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.